Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. On this episode, myself and Chris from the Grumpy Gits, this is an extended version of the video that appears on the Grumpy Gits. We wanted to have a safe space where we could ask questions about trans and LGBTQ plus issues, which often affect the autistic community and the neurodivergent community. The incidence of gender identity raises a lot more within those communities. We wanted to have a safe space where we could ask questions as guys who don't understand a lot about this stuff and actually ask the questions that people want to ask but maybe are too afraid to. So what we did was we invited Riko and Julia, who are both advocates for the LGBTQ plus community, so that we could pose some tricky questions, specifically as well surrounding the law changes in Scotland and the issue of the trans rapist who was being put into a women's prison. So as I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before we go on any further, can you please go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You'll always know when new content comes up. As I said, this is going to be a really interesting interview. We spoke to Riko and Julia, who are both LGBTQ plus advocates. Within a safe space, we wanted to make sure we could ask questions that people are probably afraid to ask, but that the idea being that we wanted to learn, we wanted to understand the community better and to be really proactive in our understanding so that we can be making the right support where necessary, especially when it comes to issues that surround gender identity and neurodivergence. So this is Riko and Julia. As I say, this was an extended version of the interview that we did on the Grumpy Gits. So if you want to check that out, you can do so in the link in the description. Yes, we have got a fascinating interview coming up. So we are here with the fantastic Riko and Julia. Now, what we want to do in this is discuss the issues that surround trans, if you like, and the LGBTQ plus community, basically following on from the issues that are arisen in Scotland, where Scotland had actually passed a law that legalised trans operations at the age of 16. And then the English came in and decided that wasn't on and have, for the first time in history, intervened in Scottish law on that basis, and it's opened up a real conversation. This ties into the fact that among the neurodivergent community, trans and gender neutrality and non-binary are a lot more common, and this is something that always plays into my heart as a parent to a child who's autistic, and knowing this is a conversation I may have to have. But Chris and I, as typical white cis males, have very little idea about what we're talking about. So expect us to make a lot of mistakes in the next brief period of time as we talk about this stuff. But I'll start with Riko. Do you want to introduce yourself, Riko?
Hi, I'm Riko. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an autistic PDA, multiply disabled parent to 3 autistic kids.
Fantastic. And Julia, obviously part of the PDA Society, which I'm obviously ambassador for.
I'm Julia, adult PDA, ADHD, no children, pronouns she. Still learning about all these things as well. And I have lots of questions as well, so I'm hoping I'll learn stuff tonight as well.
I guess the best place to start is with you, Riko. I mean, so you are trans from female to male, is that right?
No, I'm non-binary.
I've made a mistake already. See, this is what I anticipated.
My gender is actually called agender, which means like I don't have a gender basically. Whereas some people feel like the male, some people feel like the female, or some people might feel like the male and female or a mix. I just feel like I don't have a gender at all. That's called agender, which comes under the non-binary group umbrella thing. But it all comes under the trans umbrella as well. So
when did you realize you had this identity? Was it something that you kind of knew from way back when? Is it something that developed at puberty or later on or earlier? Or
well, I always just felt like me, but like I didn't fit in with, like, everybody thought I was a girl and I didn't really fit in there. It felt like people were shoving me into a box that I just did not fit me at all. And when I was in my 20s, I toyed with the idea of being like a trans male, but that felt even worse. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I came across the term non-binary, and I was like, oh, that's me, that explains everything. So I always felt a bit different, but I didn't have the words to explain it. And then when I discovered the words, it was like I found like my identity basically.
How did it affect you mentally as life progressed that you kind of didn't have this identity, or you felt that it didn't fit? How did it affect you mentally?
It was a bit difficult, more because like my mum wanted a girly girl and I just was the complete opposite of a girly girl. So we didn't get along in that sense, and that affected me that way. I did and still do have quite a lot of body dysphoria. The body that I have doesn't fit with what I expect to see, which would be more androgynous. So I did have, especially like in my teen years, I really hated parts of my body. If I could have gotten rid of them then, I would have done. Because I'm not able to do that, I've just sort of accepted that they're just sort of like, you accept that you've got an unpleasant mole that you might not want. You can't do anything about it. You just have to suck it up and get on with it. It did cause me a lot of problems when I was younger. It did affect my mental health quite a bit. So yeah, it wasn't great.
I guess because you're toying with obviously your gender identity and who you are as, non-binary, but also being autistic or neurodivergent, you've got that playing into things as well. It must have felt very isolating for a long time.
Yeah, and I didn't understand what was going on, and nobody else around me even realised there was anything. They just thought I was a bit weird. So there wasn't really any support there. I just had to figure it out by myself.
How did you come to that kind of conclusion? You must have had this sort of feeling that something wasn't right, but how did you come to the conclusion that this was it? Was it a research? Was it maybe a group that you'd spoken to? How did you come to the conclusion that this was the issue?
Well, I came across the term non-binary in an autism group and I looked it up and I was like, that makes more sense. And I tried with a few different like identities. I called myself gender non-conforming for a bit. It didn't really fit, but I couldn't find anything else. And then I came across the term agenda and I was like, oh, what's that? And I looked it up and I was like, that's me. That's it exactly. It's sort of like when you've got a key that doesn't fit anywhere and then one day you find a keyhole and you put it in, it opens, and you're like, oh, that's it. Felt like a revelation. It's just like made so much sense.
I heard a friend who is gay, and he actually told me that he spent a lot of his life, it felt like he was standing outside a window looking at everybody else. And knowing that you're the same as them in some way, but just feeling completely removed, like you're standing outside the house constantly looking in. Is that something you identify with? Does that ring true?
Sort of. For me, it's more like I've stepped into a party and everyone's like, oh yeah, you're meant to be here. And I'm looking around thinking, I'm not meant to be here. I don't fit in here. Why am I here? And everyone's like, oh no, it's fine. You're meant to be here. And I'm like, I'm not. This isn't right. There's something completely wrong here. I just can't figure out what it is.
How did you, I mean, it's one of those things that obviously every person who's going to come out as gay or transgender or non-binary, you've got that dreaded conversation you're going to have at some point with the parents and family. How did that go for you? What was that like? Was it accepting? Was it something you had real issues with?
It wasn't too much of a problem because by that point I wasn't really in touch with most of my family. So I just I came out on Facebook basically, and I only got positive comments. I didn't have any really negative ones. So I think I was quite lucky in that regard. I think anybody who had something negative to say just didn't say anything at all. I have had some negative comments over the years, but not so much hate, more like I had one person being like, why do you keep mentioning that you're non-binary and nobody cares? Why do you keep saying about it? I'm like, because I'm proud of my identity. It's like, it took me years to figure out this is who I am. Why can't I shout it at the rooftops?
I can kind of get how you feel because I recently had an ADHD diagnosis. I have not shut up about it. Constantly, I go on. I'm waiting for that. Why don't you just shut up about ADHD, for God's sake? And I can't help. Even now, I just mentioned it now. See, it came out again.
Julia, what's your place in all this? Something, obviously, the reason I asked both of you guys on was that I was part of a PDA summit, and both Julia and Riko were speaking at it, and they were part of a conversation that was on gender and gender identity. And Julia, I know it was something that you were quite passionate about. Where do you fit into all this?
Not so much gender identity, but more, I have dipped my toe in the pond, as it were. I've sort of had debates with friends whether I would, which flag would I fly? And we whittled it down last week to bisexual but prefers men. I'm not worried sort of what flag I fly because I'm with Paul and happy, and That's my identity, is my relationship with him, if you see what I mean. I did toy with the idea that I might be gay. And like the first time I slept with someone was a female. And I do still have a crush on Joanna Lumley, just so I get that in. So I guess that's where I'd fit if I was looking for somewhere to fit. But I just think it's really important to talk about sex and sexuality and not be embarrassed and not be ashamed and not be, people worry about, should I ask this question or not? Because I don't want to seem thick or stupid or, I don't, yeah, everyone should be able to ask a question. And I think sometimes people think that their question is silly or their question is pointless. And it's like, but we shouldn't feel like that. We should all be able to say, I mean, I asked it, not long ago, what do all those letters stand for? Because when I was growing up, there were 3 letters. I wasn't worried about asking my friends who are non-binary and transgender and things like that. I wasn't embarrassed to say to them, look, no offence meant, but please send me a picture of what all those flags mean. Because I haven't got a clue. When they go up on Facebook, I don't know what gender or what identity that person has. I enjoy learning about sexuality and identity.
It's something that it resonates with me on the basis purely that my eyes have, in the last 10 years, with my daughter being autistic and diagnosed and PDA and having a PDA profile and all these things that go with it. And suddenly this door opened up to a world that I didn't know existed, which is the neurodivergent world. It's kind of the same thing. I've got family members who I won't name, for obvious reasons, that's their place to do that, who dealt with issues like this, be it sexuality or being trans, or it's a world that I didn't understand the neurodivergent world until I was forced to step into it. And there's a trepidation there. I stepping into it and asking questions, you sort of worry, I don't want anyone to think that we're coming at this from anything but probably an uneducated perspective and wanting to educate ourselves more on what what's going on. And I mean, there is a higher rate of gender neutrality or non-binary, gay, trans, LGBTQ plus within the neurodivergent community. Do you think there's a reason for that, or is it just something that because they've had to identify with this world that's different already to the majority, that they're more comfortable to express that?
I mean, growing up autistic, autism and puberty is horrendous. I think there's a lot of pressure to conform, especially for women, girls, females, whatever we're going with, which is, it's still there now, is that it's our job to preferably get married, have children, live happily ever after, and life is wonderful, which people fight against, and want to try things, learn things, there's that element, I think, as well. Also, I think because we're now so much more accepting about autism, that's opened the gate to be more accepting about sexual identity.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it, yeah. And also nowadays we also have more understanding of different gender and sexualities. There's the words available that we didn't have before. And so I think that helps people to understand who they are and come out as well.
Should we discuss some of the stuff that they're discussing on the internet? As we started just before the interview, we said we wanted an education, but we would put across questions that some people may be afraid to ask online. Completely understandable. Sometimes it can be misinterpreted as, rather than wanting an education, more an attack. But we've said this is a safe space. Actually, Duncan, you know more about the Scottish situation.
Obviously, you've got this situation that's occurred recently with a Scottish trans woman who was convicted of rape. And then she was allowed to go into a women's prison, which obviously caused a lot of issues and I raised a lot of questions. And I've got to say, for me, it was something like, well, I can kind of see kind of two sides. I was really conflicted. Well, okay, if they're trans, that's a woman. So, yeah, you want a women's jail. But when you've got the added thing of obviously being a convicted rapist against women, how do you deal with that? What are your thoughts on that?
Did they make the right call also, in your eyes?
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult one because if you start going down the road of segregating people based on the genitals, you're not only putting women with men and men with women, but you also have to consider the intersex community as well. Some people are born with genitalia that doesn't fit the expectation. Some people might have a womb and a penis. Where would they go? I don't think rapists really should be in with people convicted of lesser crimes anyway. Obviously, they're a threat. Say that this woman has a penis, that doesn't stop her from raping men just as much as she might rape a woman. They're a danger to anybody, a rapist, really, when you think about it. They should be in a separate area altogether, not necessarily segregated by gender, but segregated based on the crime. Maybe it depends on, think about it from the victim's point, because if you've got a man who rapes men, it doesn't really, and they're not interested in women, why would you put them with men? You might as well be putting a thief in a shop where they can steal more things. We should be thinking more about the crime that they committed and the potential to cause more crime. If this is a woman who's raped other women, then she should be put somewhere where she can't rape other women.
There's one slight issue that I see with that, and this is the individual. And let me say first, it really stung this one because obviously there was a lot of transphobes and right-wing people who made sense in this respect. And I hated that I could see from their perspective and almost agreed. Now, the issue that I have with what you've said is that you couldn't put them on men and you couldn't put them on with women. That would, in essence, be that they would be isolated altogether. I think that's maybe one of the cruelest things you can do to a human being, is to give them no interaction whatsoever. Are we saying that she deserves that for her crimes?
It's a difficult situation because
she needs to be in prison, but where do we put them? Because there is no place to put. We can't put them with. We can't put her with women because of her crimes. We can't put them with men, almost in the same respect. So the only option you've got is to isolate. But like I've said, it's one of the most cruelest things you can do to a human is to cut off everything.
They usually put sex offenders in their own groups in prison. Murderers have their own wing, paedophiles have their own wing, and rapists do.
So where would you put her then?
There are female rapists in prison, who are born female. So she would be with them, if you see what I mean.
With females who have raped?
Yes, probably. That's where I would put her. And they are very careful with these inmates. They do mix, but it's very controlled, very monitored.
I can see why it's caused Nicola Sturgeon such a headache, because, we're discussing it and I haven't landed on that's the right answer with this. I still see issues with everything that we've discussed.
I would view her as a female and then treat her accordingly.
My issue there, though, is that her crimes historically have been against women. So then putting her in a women's facility.
Yeah, but women rape women all the time.
Yeah, there will be other women in there who have raped other women.
Yeah, I completely agree, but this particular woman has a penis.
It shouldn't make any difference. Do you put people in different prisons depending on what firearm they use to kill people?
But they don't go in prison with the firearm. That's the thing, is if we're treating this as a weapon,
it doesn't make any difference, really, what bad body part you use to rape someone. Rape is rape.
Without being graphic, there are, things women do to women that doesn't involve a penis, but does involve force. I wouldn't want either done to me. And I would, if either one happened to me, I would view both the same, whether it was a penis or an implement of some kind or another.
But you're coming from the victim's perspective there. That I see this woman who did these crimes was for her own self-gratification. That's the reason, because you're saying it from the victim's role, but she committed these crimes for her own gratification. And once she's in a population with women, she can do it again.
I think there's a big thing with the victims of people who've been raped by a man, in that they see it as the penis as the problem, when actually it's the man that's the problem. And I think we need to get away from that idea that it's the penis that's doing anything. It's the person. As long as they've got everything in place to make sure she can't do it again in the prison, then it shouldn't be a problem.
I agree with that. If the risk of repeat repeating the crime is negated, I don't see an issue with her going to a female prison. Shall we move on to one of the other questions that that does get
obviously
posed?
one of the things that's popped up recently, again, it all seems to be revolving around Scotland at the moment, but obviously Scotland have passed a law that lowered the age to 16 for people to be able to have gender transformative surgery. The English government then got involved and said, no, you can't do that. It's the first time in history that's occurred. It brings into that question, and it's a question that I will admit, prompts into my mind, that what age is it appropriate to start making these decisions? Because for me, I didn't know who I was until I was in my 40s. There are many things, decisions I made when I was younger, that I would look back on and go, that was the wrong thing to do. I really messed up there. When it comes to something along the lines of actually changing your gender, is there a problem? Because it's something that it's irreversible once it's done. And there's a lot of media out there at the moment that I keep seeing cropping up with people talking about people who regretted the decision later on, but there's nothing they can do at that point. I'm really interested to hear your guys' perspective on that, because it's something that, while I personally I see exactly, if they know they're female, great, that shouldn't be a problem. But then I come into this thing of, but at what age do you really know that? At what point do you know and you're safe to be able to say they qualify?
Well, I think first to point out that the regret rate is really, really, really small. It's something like 1% of the people who actually go through medical transitioning. There's actually a larger regret rate for things like heart transplants, like life-saving operations, than there is for having gender-affirming surgery. Also, there was a study done, I can't remember the details of it, but it showed that the majority of people who did regret having gender-affirming surgery did so because it was too hard to live at that as that gender, because of the amount of hate and ostracization towards them. They just felt it was too hard. And so they detransitioned because it was easier and safer, not because they didn't feel like they were that gender anymore. They just wanted to live in peace, basically. They wanted to have friends without having like people turning around and being like, that's abnormal, I don't like you anymore. Also, in order to medically transition, you have to go through so many hoops. You have to have therapy. You have to be on hormones for a certain amount of time. You have to live as the gender that you are for a set amount of time. This can be up to 2 years. It's a lengthy process. There is a lot of vetting. They don't just let anybody have the surgery. It's ridiculous how many hoops you have to jump through. You don't have to do this for any other surgery, as far as I know. To answer your question, when do you know? That's the thing. It's different to different individuals. Some know as young as 3. They keep saying, yes, this is definitely who I am all throughout their life. For some people, it does change. Some people are gender fluid, so that the gender changes over time. This can obviously pose problems if, like, for a few years you feel like a male, and then a few years later you feel like a female. That can obviously cause problems. But if you're in therapy for years and you're on hormones and stuff, that should be picked up, and they wouldn't go through any surgery unless they were absolutely 100% sure that's what they wanted. So some people know as young as 3. For other people, they might not, like me, they might not figure out till in the 30s. And by that point, the whole question is mute, because, like, I'm an adult, I can do whatever I want. But the waiting list is 2 years. So if I did want any surgery, I'm going to be waiting a long time before I get even seen. This is one thing that is annoying me, because isn't the age of adulthood 18? Is that the same in Scotland?
Yeah.
So many ways that kids who are 16 and 17 get treated as their adults. For example, my eldest is 16 and she's had to apply for PIP, which is the adult-based benefits thing, because she was on DLA before. But she's not an adult, she's still in school.
Yeah.
That's why are they treating her like an adult when she's technically by law still a child? That gap that makes things very confusing in some ways. When you're 16, you can advocate for your own medical treatment. I'm not sure what you can and can't get, but I know that you can go to your doctor, you can be seen without there being a parent or guardian there. Gender-affirming surgery is a medical necessity. It saves lives, basically. If a 16-year-old wanted a boob job, say they were a cis woman, and they were like, my boobs are too small, I want bigger boobs, would they be able to get that at age 16? Do they have to jump through loads of hoops? Do they have to have adult consent, the parents' consent? We should think about it like that, because that's basically the same thing, isn't it? You can't reverse a boob job, can you? How's that any different to some 16-year-old kid being like, I don't like my boobs, I want them changed? But they don't have to wait 2 years, see therapists, like wear prosthetic boobs for like 2 years or something, just to prove that this is definitely what they want. When you turn 18, you want a nose job, you could pay for it yourself and you could get that done, no questions asked. But if you want something done because you're trans, everybody's suddenly like, oh no, this is wrong, you're ruining your life. What happens if you regret it? But you can say that about any surgery, any operation. Even if they are reversible, there's still going to be scars. There's potential for scar tissue damage. There's hospital waiting times. There's always a risk with surgery of like any potential side effects. Why is gender affirming care so restricted, and all these other life-changing operations, most of which are cosmetic, why are they not? Basically,
the trans operation, which I know nothing about, is that just cosmetic then?
Yes and no. There's top surgery, which is the boob area, and bottom surgery, which is the genitalia. The top surgery you could maybe class as cosmetic. The reason why we say gender affirming care rather than like cosmetic is because of the amount of dysphoria it can create, can really affect your mental health, and that can cause a lot of problems. It's also, if you've got small boobs, you might get bullied sometimes, or it might cause you negative feelings if you feel like you're not got the body that you want. But it's not a beacon saying I am different. It's not going to get you hate. It's not going to get you like potentially attacked and murdered on the street because you're different. If you're a man walking around with boobs, it's very obvious that you might be trans. You're going to get attacked. Chances are it's very unlikely that you're not, because there's a lot of hate out there. It's basically a danger. So when you think about it like that, they're not really the same. But then you're also thinking about bottom surgery, which is the genitalia. There's also the function around those there, because you want to be able to use it. You want to be able to pee the way that feels natural to you. You want to be able to have sex with the body parts that fits your gender. These are functionative. If you had something wrong with your penis and you were a man, you went to the doctor, they'd be like, yeah, we need to get that fixed so you can have a normal sex life. If you're a trans man and you go to the doctor and say, I can't use my bits because they don't feel right, it's interfering with my sex life, they're all like, oh, well, you might regret it, etc., etc. What's the difference, really? They're not able to have a normal life because the body part isn't how they think it should be, how it what feels right.
Just want to go back to that study you said that was 1% that regret going through the entire process. Can I ask what age group did they ask that for? Because as far as I know, with what they're trying to introduce now, obviously reducing the age, that's quite a new thing. So yeah. What age group did they do that study on where it was only 1%? I don't want to say it's a definite.
It would have been over 18, because you can't get under 18 surgery in the UK when the study was conducted. I don't know the exact details. I think it was in the 20s and 30s. I'm not sure how long the study showed how long the people had transitioned for and how long they detransitioned. I'm not sure of the.
Sorry, did you say that it was 8? You can't get, because is it irreversible once you've done everything?
I'm not sure. It would depend on the person. I imagine if you have top surgery, say you remove your breast and then you want the back, that would depend. I mean, you could get it done if the doctors say that it's viable to be done, because when you have any operation, there's scar tissue and like the tissue can like merge, and sometimes you can't have an operation because there's nothing there for them to work with. But if there is stuff there, then you could have top surgery. Bottom surgery is a bit different because it's more invasive. I'm not sure if they're able to do it, because how it works is, let's go from changing a vagina into penis. What they do is they take part of the vagina and they change it so that it's sort of sticking out, if that makes sense. Because it's all the same organ, it's just shaped in different ways. So it's a bit like molding clay, but worse. You have to cut up bits and reattach them a bit. It's quite an
I did watch
procedure.
a video from sort of a baby growing from a fetus, and it does start out the same, and depending on if they're male or female, that they develop in a different way, but they start out the same. So yeah, that's absolutely true. But did you say that you couldn't get this this life-changing surgery until you were 18 though?
As far as I'm aware, in the UK, no one will do it under 18. I think
that's what they were trying to change in Scotland, and that's what has been that change is what the English government have vetoed.
Can I say something controversial? I definitely think it should be 18, just as it would be if you want a nose job or you want what I would call more elective surgery, not life. You go into hospital having a heart attack at 16, then we're going to have, we're going to operate. My only reason for that is purely based on the fact that I'm not saying all transgender teenagers are doing this, but when a new thing happens in the teenage world, a lot of people get caught up in the kind of media frenzy. My only worry would be if we lowered the age to 16, that those who maybe weren't transgender, but just because they might be another gender and they've just misidentified, we run the risk of doing an operation and then going, shit. I'm not saying they've jumped on the bandwagon, but you know what teenagers are like. We all did it.
Peer pressure as a teenager is something that
exactly. If all your friends are transgender or non-binary or gay or lesbian, there's a lot of pressure in teenage society to join in.
For my daughter, she's a PDA, and obviously, Julia, you're going to understand that as a PDA yourself. There's an element of my daughter that would be, I'm going to do this just because I think it will create shock and piss you off. She'd be wrong. She's tried it already. She was like, oh, that's what you are. That's what you are. And she was really, that was disappointing, wasn't it? Kind of went off in a half that we hadn't overreacted. But the point is that there's a part of that mentality, part of the way her brain functions, is that she would do something simply because she would see it as subconsciously this is as well.
Yeah, and
it's creating a situation that.
And there's a reason why so many things are 18. So it's 18 to drink, it's 18 to smoke, it's 18 to vote.
My worry is that we, us three, not Riko, are coming from a certain mindset that isn't looking at trans. So could we get Riko's opinion on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand your worries. I know sometimes I'm a bit like that in that I tend to my brain sort of thinks, everybody's doing this, I'll sort of join in, even though I don't really like it. The thing I think is that's less likely to happen because of all the hoops you have to jump through. You have to have therapy and everything. They have to prove that you're mentally stable before you can have any operations. You also have to go on, I think you have to go on hormones before you can get bottom surgery, because it has to be that way. So you have to have gone through basically puberty before you can get the operation as well. We're talking quite a long time. It's unlikely that there are many kids who are just doing it to fit in that would be able to carry it out for that long with that many eyes watching them and going through therapy and everything. We are talking about quite invasive surgery as well. I don't think many people will want to have that unless they're really, really sure, because you're talking, it's a sensitive area down there, and there's a lot of aftercare and there's a lot of stuff you have to go through. The doctors will be talking about a lot of stuff, giving you a lot of information and stuff. I think if you weren't really fully committed, you might be I don't know. I think
that makes perfect sense, because I mean, I went through my phases of that age. There is no way that I would go through something like that because a couple of my mates in a group were. So
especially having autistic cis men get very sensitive about down there. So I can't imagine any cis men would be
And
up for.
I suppose it depends. Are we talking about them starting the process at 16? Or are we
That's a
talking
different
about
question altogether. Yeah.
if you start the process at 16, so you go and see a psychologist or psychiatrist or whoever it is, and you start the talking therapies and you have discussions about operations. I don't see the problem in that at 16.
Where does the puberty blockers come in all this? Because I've heard rumours about that they give puberty blockers to stop them developing because they see themselves as trans. Where does the puberty blockers come into all this?
Puberty blockers, that would be the first step for anybody that's not already gone through puberty who feel like they might be trans or non-binary. Puberty blockers are reversible. They're basically, it's like putting a plug in a bath. It stops any water from going out, and then you pull the plug and it just carries on. They usually give them if you're just starting puberty in order to stop it until you've made a decision which type of puberty you basically want to go through. Because if you decide that you are trans and you want to go onto hormones, you would stop the blockers and then go immediately onto hormones. Whereas if you decided, no, I'm happy with the sex that I've got, you would just stop the puberty blockers and you would progress through puberty as normal. I mean, there's risk with anything. Any medication you take, there's going to be side effects and some risk, but they are incredibly low risk. There's like very little harm that can be done. They were originally developed for for kids who had precocious puberty, which is puberty that starts ridiculously young as 2. Obviously, nobody wants a 2-year-old going through puberty, so that's why they developed the puberty blockers. And then people discovered they could use it for trans and non-binary people, and that's what it's used for now. And I think sometimes you get a lot of transphobic people being like, oh, that giving the kids medication, it's really harmful. They've come up with this thing just for trans. It's not. It wasn't originally developed for trans people. And it's as safe as it can be. There's been loads of studies on that. It's been used for a long time without much problems. So
with the period of puberty, does that mean, say someone would initially start puberty at 14 and it would carry on till, I don't know, 18? If somebody started taking those puberty blockers right at the start of the process and they realised, say, 3 years later that actually I've made a mistake, I am the gender that I am, I don't know, they've just realised, does that mean that those 4 years would start from 17 and it would carry on all the way up into 21? Or would it be kind of in a year they're going to go through 4 years worth of puberty?
I think it probably would be the same amount of time that they would have had the puberty anyway. I'm not entirely sure about that, whether it would speed up based on like the body already being a bit older.
It is quicker, but not that quick. It's about half the time. And there are some issues, not so much for females, but boys that have taken puberty blockers, they don't really tend to, when they get to sort of say 17, 18, and then they stop taking them, they don't really have what I would call a full-on masculine puberty. So they have a deep voice, but not very deep. They have facial hair, but not much. They have muscles that men have, but not much. They're sort of not as developed as perhaps they would have been had they have had puberty normally, if that makes sense.
Wouldn't this cause that sort of mental health issues, though?
Probably.
If something like, if they made that realization, I actually, I've made a mistake, I'm going to come off the puberty blockers.
I honestly don't think many do.
I'm thinking more that as a young man, especially myself, I can't put myself in this situation, but myself, I had a social circle and lots of friends. Wouldn't that put undue pressure, mental pressure on someone who had those friends and was going out and drinking, and they were going through the puberty of a 14-year-old when they were, say, 17, or sorry, let's say 18, because they're out drinking? Wouldn't that put a strain on their mental health?
It
Possibly.
might, but there are people who start puberty later normally anyway. You could get support for that. There would be things that doctors and therapists could probably do to help them. They would know about all of this, I imagine, because they get told about it before they take the puberty blockers. So they would be old enough to understand all of this. And if they weren't cognitively able to understand it, the doctors would just be like, "Now we're not giving them to you until you're
puberty's hitting
enough to..."
earlier and earlier and earlier in people's lives now, especially in neurodivergent. So there's a early onset puberty is very common in the neurodivergent world. You get this thing, you know, my daughter started puberty at 9.
Oh, I was 8. Woohoo!
Oh, there you go. We have a winner.
But if you think about it, though, I was put on the pill at 11, not for a contraceptive reason, but to manage PMT and also to make them regular. You know, that comes with risks.
Just to sum it up, so going through this process, even from a young age, there is plenty of safety nets and get-out clauses to make sure that a young person is making the right decision. And if the person that's they're speaking to doesn't feel fully convinced, they can pull the plug on the entire process. This isn't a case of saying to a child, "Oh, you want to change gender, it's fine, it's a quick process, done." There's a long process, and it's all the way huge steps where someone is monitoring.
But the other side also is that for many trans and non-binary people, the process is too long and there's too many hoops. I've had somebody saying that they weren't able to get medically transitioned because they're autistic. I see that as a mental health issue. A PDA what is going through the process, but they don't want to dress. I can't remember what gender they are. So said they're a trans boy, and they don't want to dress as a boy until after they get the surgery. But the doctor says you have to be living as a man, like wearing the correct clothes before we'll let you have the surgery. And this is actually a problem for many people, especially non-binary people. If you say, if I wanted to go to have top surgery, they'd be like, "Well, are you a man?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm non-binary." And they're like, "Well, why do you want top surgery then? You don't dress like a man." I'm like, "Because I'm not a man, I just hate my boobs." But this is real issues that people come across. If you've got any mental health issues, they could deny you based on that, even if you absolutely know what you want. You're an adult, you've had years to do this, you've come out to everybody, you've been living as the gender that you are. And a doctor can be like, "Nah, you've got OCD, we don't really want to put you through that." It's things like that that are actually making it harder for trans and non-binary people. A lot of people are like, "Oh, people can get surgery to change the gender, everybody's going to be wanting it now." But the reality is the opposite. It's really hard to get it. It's not that easy. And for some of us, like me, I've got physical disabilities that would make it difficult for me to recover from surgery. It could put me at risk, so I wouldn't be able to have any surgery that I wanted based on that. It's actually the opposite of what a lot of the transphobes think. It's really hard. It's really difficult. It takes years. At the moment, the waiting list is 2 years before you even get seen by anybody, never mind actually getting any hormones or anything. It's ridiculous. It needs to be better. It needs to be faster, whether that's 16 or 18. I'm a bit worried about the 16 because in order to basically bottom surgery, you need to have, that area needs to be developed as fully as it can be, which is a bit of a issue if you're not finished going through puberty yet, and 16 you might still be growing. So I can see from that point of view, waiting until you're 18 might be better. If you've been saying that you're a trans boy from age 3 and you've gone through you've been on puberty blockers, you've started hormones, and people are saying, and you're 16 and you're like, "I've been waiting for years, I just want this over and done with now so I can live my life." And people are like, "No, we don't want you to, we want you to wait till you're a bit older." Even if the doctor says, "Yes, your body is fully ready," it's not very fair on other people to decide, "No, actually, we don't want you to." So I think it needs to be a case-by-case basis. Some people, their bodies won't be ready, and so they should wait a bit longer, or maybe they've not had time to think it through properly. But for some, they are there, they are ready, they are waiting. It's just law that's saying, "No, you have to wait a bit longer," and that's not really fair.
I think we could go on all night discussing this stuff because there's so much to learn. I know for myself, it's eye-opening hearing these perspectives and things that I just generally don't consider going about my usual life. And being able to ask difficult questions to you guys has been really a privilege, and I really want to thank you so much for taking the time and for being vulnerable and honest about things as well, and telling us where it's from. So thanks so much for joining us, guys. It's been amazing.
And hopefully no offence caused.
Hopefully.
No. I did try my best.
Guys, I'm going to say thank you again. And with that, so that was the interview. I found it fascinating. Personally, I found it really eye-opening, and I understand a lot more about the complexity of these issues and how it affects people. As somebody who's not spent a lot of time within that community, I found it really enlightening. And I'm really thankful to both Riko and Julia for being very open, very vulnerable, and very patient, most of all. Please do go hit like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. You'll always know when new content's coming up. I will see you again on the next episode, but in the meantime, please do stay safe.